Chapter 11. Adventure in Venice. Of course, it was not as simple as that. Holmes had other questions regarding Andrade to pose to Randolph Rapp, and on our return to Baker Street, messages flowed from his pen. But on the following day we resumed our travels, nothing new to one associated with the greatest manhunter of all time. Holmes, for no reason that I could fathom, chose to take the train to Dover, and from there the steamer to Belgium. In the great harbour station at Ostend he conferred at some length with the station master, a meeting to which I was not privy. Being a bad sailor, I was attempting to sip some passable tea and consume dry biscuits with no great success. My stomach was not in the best condition, and the table at the station restaurant, where my friend left me, seemed disposed to tilt on occasion. Purely an illusion. When this youth fetched me, the station master was by his side, with a veritable sheaf of rail tickets and an enthusiastic expression on his face. I knew what that meant. Holmes's knowledge of rail traffic had suggested a varied route, festooned with connections, which had positively enthralled the station master, who would certainly wire ahead to assure us of superior service during our journey. It was a procedure that Holmes had followed on previous cases. Whatever strange stations we dropped off at to await an inbound train, whatever intricate route we followed, we were certain to arrive in Venice in the shortest possible time. Holmes's travel plans invariably depended on perfect timing, which was always forthcoming. In the minds of Anglo-Saxons, possibly other races as well, there lurks the tendency to attribute a personality and sex to inanimate objects, even such awesome things as thundering locomotives. The beautiful blue train to the south of France has always seemed feminine to me, whereas the luxurious Orient Express is associated with the masculine gender. If, amidst the pistons and wheels of a great train, there lurks a smidgen of soul, I know of a certainty that it is aware of the presence of Sherlock Holmes, the master sleuth. Call me mad, but the results bear out my fancy, and after 4 changes en route, we arrived at the pearl of the Adriatic in an amazingly short time indeed. The Saint Lucia railway station was as irrational as ever, but Holmes had us out of it and into a suite in the Venezia Hotel on the Grand Canal in short order. During our rush through Western Europe and down the boot of Italy, one thing was glaringly obvious. Our route had been relayed to others, for cables had arrived for Holmes at various stations during the trip. He did not choose to make me privy to all of their contents, but I gathered that Howard Andrade resided in a private home on the Rio de San Cancianco. I assumed Holmes had made arrangements to approach the gentleman, since this seemed his intent, but my native curiosity as to his methods and plans were diverted by my queasy stomach and travel fatigue. Once installed in the Venezia, with assurances from my friend that nothing would happen of an immediate nature, I devoted myself to the healing arms of Morpheus. and in early evening awoke considerably refreshed and feeling quite the new man. Holmes was pacing the sitting-room, clad in his purple robe and puffing on his pipe, giving no indication of fatigue from our journey. I sensed that he had not rested since our arrival and confirmed this thought when I spied the butt of a thin Mexican cigar in an ashtray. "Orloff has been here," I cried instinctively. My friend's eyes twinkled. "Watson, what a delight! You spy the only clue to the presence of our somewhat sinister friend in a trice. Truly our years together have not been wasted." "But what is he doing here?" I snapped my fingers suddenly. "Aha! You contacted your brother, and Wakefield Orloff followed us to Italy." "I certainly contacted Mycroft after our interesting meeting with Randolph Rapp. However, this led to a trading of information. He was most interested to learn that Chu San Fu is en route here, where I at. After a bit of prodding he revealed that Orloff has been in Venice for some time, keeping an eye on Howard Andrade, the expert on ancient writings. I was regarding the sleuth with knitted brows. "You mean your brother anticipated Chu San Fu's trip to Venice?" "Not at all, but Mycroft has been captivated with the idea of something in Egypt being at the bottom of the Mideast unrest. He knew of Howard Andrade's work on the secret writings of the pharaohs, and very reasonably put two and two together." "Holmes, you'll have to be more specific than that." "Then I must blend fact with conjecture," he replied, his hands clasped behind him as he strode the length of the room and back again. "The ominous meetings of Moslem leaders being fact. As to what has stirred the Mideast cauldron, we must look for some new element, some occurrence out of the ordinary that has brought these various factions together at this specific time. If the catalyst is in Egypt, conjecture leads us to Andrade. If he has decoded the secret writings, that is certainly new and could lead to additional breakthroughs in the unraveling of the history of the ancient civilization. Remember, Watson, it was but in 1822 that the Frenchman Champlain, using the Rosetta Stone as his key, cracked the hieroglyphics. Since Egypt's history was recorded in stone and preserved by the unique dry climate, Champlain's discovery allowed modern scholars to learn more about life in ancient Egypt than we know our own original Saxons. The Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1799, but it took almost a quarter of a century before that black lump of basalt fulfilled its destiny. I realized that I was shaking my head. "I'm a little vague on that, Holmes. As I recall from school days, there were some 14 lines of hieroglyphics and 50 or so lines of Greek based on them, since the Greek message was a translation of the ancient carvings. What took so long?" "Actually, the message was in three forms, Watson. It included 32 lines of common Demotic script, but that's not important. The difficulty in decoding the hieroglyphics lay in the fact that some of the signs are alphabetic, some phonetic, while others simply represent ideas. Trying to translate ideas is a bit of a problem, is it not? A lot of guesswork involved. Now, about those secret writings, can we not assume that they were composed in part or wholly by the rulers themselves, privy because of their position and authority to the as yet unrevealed secrets of the land of the Nile? The Rosetta Stone recorded a decree by priests of Memphis praising the pharaoh Ptolemy V some 200 years before Christ. Little of importance there, but what if one of the golden tablets, as yet undeciphered, dates back 3,000 years before Christ and contains the secret of the Khufu pyramid? What secret? I said instinctively. King Khufu, or Cheops in Greek, built the Great Pyramid, old chap. Its size alone is staggering, but its orientation is truly amazing. The mass of stone covers 13 acres, and its sides run almost exactly to the cardinal compass points. Its deviation from true north is but 5 arc minutes. Such an alignment could not happen simply by chance. Do you know the shadow it casts can be used as a calendar, and an accurate one at that? Holmes's eyes were burning as he spoke, and it took no genius to realize that he was, for the moment, caught up in the myriad of unanswered questions of ancient Egypt. I mentally chided myself for a clod. What more reasonable that the solver of mysteries would be captivated by the greatest puzzle in the history of mankind? My own poor brain was dazzled by the thought of a civilization predating ours by 5,000 years, that could construct edifices so colossal as to defy the skills of our mechanical age. The light faded from Holmes's eyes to be replaced by the cold analytic look that grounded his flight into the mysterious fantasies conjured up by the pharaohs of so long ago. But come, Watson, our duties are of a more practical nature. Either Andra- either Andrade has cracked the carvings of the ruling class, or he has not, and we'd best find out. Wakefield Orloff has arranged an appointment with the hieroglyphics expert, who lives but a short distance away. Outside the hotel, Holmes secured a gondola for us, which I regarded with some trepidation. The waters of the Grand Canal were as smooth as glass, and my erratic stomach was of no concern. However, the 32-foot craft leaned to the left, by design of course, and being only 5 foot in width, it did not appear seaworthy to me. However, similar vessels studded the waters of the canal, and I overcame my reservations and gingerly gained a seat, as Holmes directed the gondolier, who promptly put us in motion with his single oar. The small craft had a unique rhythm, not unpleasant, and I actually began to enjoy our journey, though convinced that this type of conveyance would never replace the dependable hansom. There was considerable traffic, but our oarsman was skilful. Holmes pointed out some truly striking mansions on the Riva del Vin, and then I spied the Rialto Bridge. It was an imposing stone span over the canal that inspired a sinking feeling within me as we made for it. I say, Holmes, that bridge has shops on it. 2 rows, old fellow, and well trafficked. But the thing's overloaded. It will collapse on us. Rest easy, Watson. It does seem a bit inelegant, but gondolas like ours have been sailing under it safely since 1591. This silenced me and reassured me as well. Shortly after passing under the Rialto Bridge, we abandoned the Grand Canal for the San Cancianco, on which the Egyptologist lived. This being a much smaller canal, there were frequent stone footbridges that curved overhead as we moved down its still waters. The houses on both sides were private dwellings of varied heights and designs, though universally constructed of stone. Our destination proved to be 2 stories, with its main entrance on the Rio de San Cancianco, and one side facing a tributary canal. There was no porch or float, and of course no sidewalks. One simply rode to the front door and stepped into a small vestibule. At the corner of the house was a bow window overhanging the quiet waters of the canal and sufficiently different from the general architecture to catch my eye. Some thoughtful builder had conceived of a view of both the canals the house faced on, and a pleasant sight of an evening it must provide. Holmes instructed our gondolier to await our return and knocked on the impressive door. I noted that the adjacent house had ivy growing on its outer surface, which was dotted with small stone balconies from which tendrils of vines dangled, providing a pleasing, slightly bohemian look. Everywhere there were carved arches, stone overhangs, and the general appearance of a well-tended though ancient construction. Many of the buildings must have been at least 300 years old, I thought, perhaps older. They had to take good care of the stonework, for Holmes had mentioned that seasonal high tides sometimes raise the level of the water to the first story. Doors must be jolly well tight-set, I thought, as the one in front of us opened. I did not know what I expected to find on the other side, possibly a servant or the Egyptologist we wished to contact, but here was a familiar and welcome face. The straight nose, the small military moustache, and the moon-shaped visage of the portly and deadly Wakefield Orloff. Those fathomless green eyes defrosted with an alien warmth as they flitted over us and by habit checked our back trail. Then the security agent stepped to one side, indicating for us to enter. We were constantly meeting, usually in unusual places, and greetings were superfluous. Ever since the matter of the Louvre robbery, so brilliantly handled by Holmes, Orlov had been ranked as an associate, and I was always grateful for his presence, which carried with it an insurance value as sound as the pound sterling. "Gentlemen," said Orlov in his low, mild voice. This is Howard and Ruddy, a figure leaning over a huge table turned towards us, and, with a departing glance at the subject of his scrutiny, crossed in our direction. The Egyptologist was beardless, with flaxen hair streaked here and there with grey, and a broad, pink, good-humoured face. His waistcoat had apparently given up its efforts to compass his girth, but he moved quickly enough, and his handshake was firm. Mr. Holmes, of course, and this must be Dr. Watson, whose words have provided many a fascinating hour. I'm honored, gentlemen. It was immediately obvious to me that Andrade was a splendid fellow. As he indicated available chairs in the very large room in which we stood, I surveyed the interior of this quaint Italian house. That the hieroglyphics expert or a predecessor had instituted extensive remodeling was apparent. The walls to what had to be a combined living room and study rose 2 stories to an ornamental plaster ceiling that was quite magnificent. There were numerous bookcases, well filled as befitted the home of a scholar. The south wall was interesting indeed, containing a first-story gallery running the depth of the house and reached by a curved staircase. Off the upper landing, guarded by a wooden balustrade, was but one door, and I assumed that the master bedchamber was there. Windows, which formerly served the original first story, now provided 2 rooms of apertures for the large central chamber. During the day I imagined the area was brightly lit by sunlight, even though there were no windows in the walls other than the one that constituted the front of the house. Behind us and to the right of the entrance door must be the kitchen facilities, possibly servants' quarters as well, I thought. The remainder, save for that portion of the first floor facing onto the gallery, was one large open room, lit by chandeliers and with Heppel-white furniture tastefully positioned. The walls were festooned with pictures, all of Egyptian scenes. There was a delightful feeling of space. The room was dominated by the oaken table Andrade had been at when we arrived. It was strewn with pictures, calipers, dividers, parallel rules, and other equipment that I could not recognize. I sensed that Andrade worked mainly on his feet, circling the table that was the focus of his area of activity. Having seated his visitors, Andrade leaned against the table and surveyed us with a half-smile. "I came, Mr. Holmes, to Venice to ensure privacy, and must admit that I was a bit put out when Mr. Orloff appeared on the scene." He shot a quick look at our friend, who was in the process of lighting one of the thin Mexican cigars that he fancied. However, his credentials were so impressive that I could not refuse him an audience, and a good thing too, since he has done me a great service. Andrade's eyes shifted to a pile of photographs on the table, and then he moved to sink, somewhat slowly, into a large armchair. Then he requested that I meet with you, Mr. Holmes, and Dr. Watson. Now, I would be a dullard indeed if I did not think that a visit from the world's foremost detective is connected with the Egyptian research I'm involved in. It is, replied Holmes. My Our investigations are not of an archaeological nature, but they do seem to point to Egypt, and you are the first new element in hieroglyphics since Champollion. Andrade's full lips twisted in a slight grimace. The Frenchman gets all the credit. Not that he doesn't deserve it, you know. Positive genius. Spoke Latin, Greek, and Hebrew by the age of 11, mastered Arabic, Syrian, Chaldean, and Coptic in 2 years. However, our own Thames Young is rather overlooked. It was he who deduced that in hieroglyphics the royal names were inscribed in oval frames. "Cartouches," said the youth. The Egyptologist's eyes brightened and he regarded Holmes with even more respect. "Exactly, sir. You have a familiarity with the subject. But I take us from the matter at hand. You want to know if I have been successful in decoding the secret writings." "That's it," replied Holmes. Andrade stirred uncomfortably in his chair. "Of course you understand that our discussion is highly confidential. Later this year I will deliver an address to a group of skeptical and in many cases antagonistic colleagues. It will serve my purposes best if they are not aware of my full revelations. Then I intend to publish a paper that might have the same reception as Champollion's letter to M. Dacier in regard to the alphabet of the phonetic hieroglyphics." His mouth pursed for a moment and then he gave vent to a sigh of resignation. "Well, not quite as earth-shaking, since Champollion was first. No matter, I can give you an answer for the first time." As though the thought of his quest produced a sudden surge of energy, Andrade rose from his chair and crossed nervously to the table. Turning, he slid his posterior onto its surface. Had he crossed his legs beneath him, there would have been a semblance to a seated Buddha, but, sorry, his arms behind him, he leaned back, and there was a creak of protest from the oak, but the table was stoutly constructed. Andrade's eyes had an almost dreamy look, as though he was reliving the work of years, which in fact he was. It was the temple of Abu Simbel that first aroused the curiosity of scholars, myself included. It lies 100 miles south of Karnak and is the largest monolithic sculpture in the world. The temple is cut into a solid sandstone cliff, and its facade is covered with huge effigies of Ramesses II. Inside the temple, in the inner sanctuary, is another statue of Ramesses II, and underneath it a number of inscriptions that have defied translation. Thomas Young became intrigued with the idea of another form of hieroglyphics, and this theory, to which I subscribed, was buttressed by certain golden tablets that had shown up. They are very rare. Grave robbers must have melted them down in time gone by. Then, with the coming of our modern era, they realized that the genuine article was worth much more to a great museum or wealthy collector than the basic worth of the precious metal. Three of the tablets are in the possession of the Egyptian Museum, and I have seen copies of the inscriptions, but never the tablets. In the beginning, all I had to work with were the inscriptions at Abu Simbel. I did decode the secret writing, developing certain ideas of Young, but that's another story. What I needed desperately was confirmation of my findings. Now, it is common knowledge in the field that Giovanni Balzoni, the Italian and archaeologist and adventurer, came upon two more golden tablets not long before his death early in the century. He got them out of Egypt, for things were very easy-going in those days, but they disappeared. They turned up 50 years later and were purchased by Mannheim, the great German collector. Since they were the only golden tablets outside of Egypt, Mannheim made quite a fuss about his acquisition, and they were stolen from him and have not reappeared to this day. I could not contain myself any longer. But what have these ancient tablets to do with your discovery? I asked. Happily, Andrade seemed to welcome my question. Proof positive, Dr. Watson. I have translated the Ramesses inscriptions along with all the copies of the known tablets that I could secure, but I needed more material to work on. He waved a large hand in the direction of Wakefield Orloff. It was here that this gentleman came to my aid. Holmes was regarding the security agent with surprise. Don't tell me that in such a short time you located the Mannheim tablets. As Orloff laid aside his cigar, it was Andrade who fielded the conversational ball. Almost as good, Mr. Holmes. He secured photographs of them. Andrade slid off the table and spread a pile of large photographs on its surface. Here, gentlemen, are pictures of the Mannheim tablets, which I have translated as conclusive proof that the riddle of the secret writings is no more. We all clustered round the table. The pictures were of rows of inscriptions taken from various angles. To me, they were but a series of carvings bearing no relation to a written language. But Holmes seemed intrigued, and Andrade was positively bubbling with joy as he pointed to various lines of ancient text. Holmes's eyes had gone to Wakefield Orloff. "Rather nice piece of work this," he said, indicating the photographs. "How did you get them?" There was a fleeting shadow of self-satisfaction on Orloff's impassive face. Memory helped. I recalled that Mannheim is a great believer in pictures, most often of himself, and in the newspapers whenever possible. He is no shrinking violet. His photographer, Verdelin of Berlin, was evidently influenced by his greatest patron because he is a collector as well, of photographs. I had some dealings with the gentleman once and knew that invariably, when on a big job, he made copies of his work, which he carefully filed. So you went to Berlin and secured the copies in Verdelin's files? Said Holmes. He owed me a favor, was the security agent's reply, accompanied by his quiet smile. In any case, with the pictures I saw the end of the road, continued Andrade. I have been at work for 36 hours, gentlemen. My poor assistant gave up the ghost 3 hours ago and is in my room upstairs in an exhausted sleep. To be frank, I don't feel the slightest fatigue. The adrenaline of victory, I stated automatically, since the Egyptologist seemed intent in going over various inscriptions and had a courteous audience in Holmes and Orloff. I withdrew from the scene slightly. The ancient writings had little appeal to me, and I moved to the bow window that had captured my attention upon arrival. On the San Cancianco Canal there was an endless procession of boats and gondolas, and I noted skyrockets from the direction of Campo San Marco. There was a drumbeat of sound almost like muted gunfire, which I identified as fireworks, concluding that it was but another festival night in the city noted for such celebrations. As my gaze swiveled towards the small tributary canal running at right angles to the San Cancianco, I shook my head for a moment and blinked my eyes. "I say," I exclaimed, turning to the others, "there seems to be some sort of rope made of knotted sheets dangling from a window of this house." My words had an immediate effect. A quick glance passed between Holmes and Orloff, and the sleuth darted for the curved staircase leading to the upper story. I was right on his heels as I stumbled after Holmes. I saw, out of the corner of my eye, a remarkable sight. Orloff had not made a move towards the stairs. Instead, as though levitated, he was now on top of the stout table, but for no more than an instant. 2 steps forward on the table surface, and his steel legs dipped, and then straightened with a surge of power, and he was in the air, arms outstretched and above his head. His leap would have been admired by a ballet dancer. Then widespread fingers gripped the top of the balcony railing, and the amazing power of his arms and shoulders took over, propelling his body upwards. His legs tugged in and then swung between those knotted arms and exquisite grace. The hands were released, and, cat-like, he was on the gallery as Holmes and I came round the curve in the stairs. Orloff's movements were without pause. Already he was flowing across the floor, and his shoulder crashed against the door of the bedroom, knocking it asunder like a battering ram. There was a flash of light from within the room and the thunder of a gun, but the security agent had dropped to the floor in a rolling movement. Scrambling to the head of the stairs, Holmes and I could see the bedroom interior. By an open window an indistinct figure had one leg through the opening. 3 more flowers of light blossomed from the vicinity of the man's right hand, and the roar of sound was continuous. The ever-moving mass that was Orlov had rolled behind a substantial chair and was coming to a semi-erect position, his hand reaching to the back of his neck and the chamois sheath attached between his shoulder blades. His arm was no more than a blur, and there was the flash of metal, but the Toledo steel of his Spanish throwing knife buried itself in the window frame, for the figure had dropped through the opening. I thought I heard a splash from without as I reached the bedroom door. Orlov had moved behind his knife, brushing the chair in front of him away as though it were a toy. Then the first interruption in his continuous flow of movement from the floor below to the bedroom occurred. Crossing like a quicksilver shadow towards the window, his foot stumbled over a small stool, unseen in the dim light, and his legs came out from under him. But it did not stop him. The man's reflexes were truly of another world, for in mid-air he dipped into a forward roll, his thick neck and shoulders caressing the floor, and, of a sudden, he snapped erect on both feet beside the window. His actions really defied description, for, though they were made with a speed that one could not accept in retrospect, such was his grace that he seemed to float in slow motion, an illusion fostered by the total absence of any wasted movement. When danger crooked its ominous digit and invited mischance, Orlov seemed to embark on a programmed path, always one step in advance of fate's finger. An outstretched palm halted Holmes's progress towards the window, and I bumped into him from behind. "They've fished him into a gondola," said the security agent in a calm voice suitable for an invitation to tea. "They are turning into the main canal." As he spoke, his right hand dipped to his waistband and a small caliber revolver seemed to materialize. "I could no," stated Holmes flatly. "The fireworks have covered the gunfire. But let's not have target practice in the San Cancianco. By the time we reach our waiting gondola, they will have lost themselves in the canal traffic, so we'd best write this matter off." Holmes raised the flame in a glass lamp, throwing additional illumination into the room. "No aspersions on your marksmanship, good fellow. I know you could have picked the intruders off like clay pigeons, but I'm not sure that's the way we wish to play it." Orlov's green eyes were locked with the sleuth's for a moment, and a shadow of understanding touched his face. Then the handgun disappeared, and he calmly retrieved his throwing knife from the window frame, tucking it back between his shoulder blades with an automatic movement. He then indicated a makeshift rope anchored to the bed and running through the window. "How about this?" Holmes shrugged, having already noted the bedsheets hurriedly knotted together. "Improvised," which tells us this incident was not pre-planned. As Orlov drew the line of bed linen back through the window, there was an exclamation from the landing, and Howard Andrade, puffing from his ascent, was regarding us with wide, startled eyes. I had quite forgotten the good man, but his appearance served as a further reminder of all that had happened in such a brief period of time. Our host had been spectator to the abrupt departure of his three visitors, then the sound of a shattered door, a burst of gunfire, and finally silence. Having recovered his wits and made his way upstairs, he found nothing but two men calmly analyzing the scene, and another, myself, looking befuddled. "I say," Andrade stammered, "what have we here? A Mameluke revolt?" His voice was a full octave higher than normal. Suddenly his eyes darted round the room. "Where is Aaron?" "Your assistant?" questioned Holmes. "Aaron Lewis. I secured his services in Venice." Suddenly I shook off the dazed feeling that had enveloped me. "Look here. You said this Lewis chap was exhausted and had retired before collapsing. This is your bedroom?" "Yes," replied Andrade. "Lewis normally resides in a small room on the ground floor. I sent him up here so that my potting around would not disturb the poor fellow." "Why, it's as plain as a pikestaff," I said triumphantly. "The intruders were after you, and spirited away your assistant by mistake." "Good Lord! Why?" Since neither Holmes nor Orloff seemed disposed to offer a comment, I elaborated for the benefit of the startled cryptographer. "Someone wishes to learn the code of the secret writings. That's rather obvious." "I think," said Holmes gently, "that a discussion is called for." Falling in with his thought, I rather led Andrade towards the stairs and the living room below. Questions bubbled to the surface of my mind, but were submerged by my medical training. Andrade seemed to be suffering a reaction from all the excitement, and I thought it well to get him seated below, securing some alcoholic stimulation for him from a well-stocked cabinet. In a moment the Egyptologist's colour improvised, and he was able to regard the three of us with a whimsical expression. "This rather bizarre occurrence is much more in your line, Mr. Holmes, than mine. Am I to assume that there might be more of the same?" It was Wakefield Orloff who spoke up. "I think not, sir. At least, I shall take suitable precautions to make sure your domicile is not invaded again." I well knew what that meant. More of Mycroft Holmes's faceless men would appear. For all I knew, Orloff might already have associates at his beck and call in Italy. Andrade took another sizable sip of his libation. "What is the meaning of all this melodrama, gentlemen? And what about Aaron Lewis, my poor associate?" Warned by the haunted look in his eyes and fearing palpitations, I spoke instantly, and in my most soothing doctor manner. "Once the hoodlums learn that they have the wrong man, surely they will release Lewis from their clutches." "Let us hope so," said Holmes. It struck me that his manner was surprisingly casual. "About your assistant, Mr. Andrade. How did he happen to come into your employment?" "I am a bachelor," so it was easy for me to pull up stakes and come to Venice in search of solitude to complete my project. The house is mine by virtue of a generous, now departed, uncle. I knew that I was on the verge of a breakthrough, and my work was intensified. At this point, much filing was required. I was at my wits' end when Louis appeared at my door, much as Mr. Orloff did, but recently. "Possibly for the same reason," commented Holmes quietly. The Egyptologist did not notice this remark, but I filed it away. Louis said he had heard of my project and had excellent references, including a rather glowing letter from Flinders Petrie. I know Petrie and recognized his distinctive script. Louis seemed well up on the Egyptian picture and took charge of my files, putting them in workmanlike order. It was such a relief to have the paperwork attended to that I was able to progress much faster towards what is now the final solution. "What did he look like?" asked Orloff. "Louis? Tall, thin-boned, I suppose. Cadaverous is not amiss as a description. Very quiet chap, used to the simple life, but then those who have been on expeditions to the Nile most often are. Had a nasal problem, and tobacco smoke bothered him. Fact is, that is why I suggested that he use my bedroom today. With the successful translation of the Mannheim tablets a fait accompli, I was terribly keyed up and smoking like a blessed steel mill. Louis is along a bit, age-wise, and I was concerned for his physical well-being, as I am for yours right now, I interjected. You've been on your feet for a day and a half, and the recent events have been wearing. I am prescribing bed rest immediately." There were other questions that Holmes wished to ask, possibly Orlov as well, but both stifled their instincts in consideration of Howard Andrade's condition. One of the dividends of my profession is the delight in having the last word. When a doctor says "that's it," there are seldom arguments from a prime minister on down. We took Orlov in our gondola to the Grand Hotel where I assumed he was staying. I had the idea that he would join us at the Venezia after resolving matters that claimed his attention, one being to throw a net round Howard Andrade. On our journey Holmes pointed out the beautiful Palazzo Dario to me, planned by Pietro Lombardo, as well as the huge and luxurious Piazza Corner della Ca Grande, planned by Jacopo Sansovino. Lombardo and Sansovino were unknown to me, but my friend seemed to place great store in their names. I recalled that he indulged in a passion for Renaissance architecture at one time. It was in relation to an old case, not without points of interest, which I may make available to readers some day. The hour was late, but Venice is cosmopolitan, and Holmes and I were able to secure a satisfying meal in the hotel dining room at an hour when most Englishmen would be dawdling over their last brandy and seriously considering their beds. The same thought was crossing my mind as we occupied ourselves with a bowl of fruit augmented by some fine cheeses. It was then that we were joined by Orlov. Our waiter hastened to secure a chair for the security agent. Whether he knew Orlov, who was well-travelled, or just reacted to the commanding presence of the deceptively rotund man, I do not know. During dinner, Holmes had been preoccupied, and I had not disturbed his thoughts. But now revelations would be forthcoming, which delighted me. Orlov was no Randolph Rapp, but then who was? However, his experience, honed to a fine edge in the shadowland of internal espionage, was extensive. Being a man of acute perception and few words, his conversations with Holmes frequently had a staccato quality, and I was invariably hard-pressed to keep abreast of the two. "Andrade is well covered?" This was more a statement than a question from Holmes, as he sliced the peeling from an orange. "Cooks himself, simplifies things. Cleaning woman comes in 3 times a week. We'll check her out." Orlov accepted a wedge of cheese that I offered him. "May put a man on the premises. Butler, courtesy of Her Majesty's Government. The cryptographer won't object. Rather keen, you know. Must realize that his discovery has touched off a bit of a chain reaction. If not, I thought you will convince him." Orlov was to the manor born, and I could picture said gentleman plying a thriving trade selling sand in the Sahara. "What news of the Chinaman?" queried Holmes. "His yacht should be here shortly." "Hmm. You'd think Chu Sanfu's arrival would have signaled the move on Andrade's residence. Whole thing was rushed. Sloppy job." I had poured Orlov a tot of after-dinner liquor, and he was regarding Holmes over the rim of a sparkling glass. "I've a mind as to what hurried them. You." It was at this point that I threw patience to the winds. "Could you translate this interchange for my dull ears?" I fear my manner was somewhat huffy. "Chu Sanfu's agents are in Venice," explained Orlov. "They hastily removed Aaron Lewis from Andrade's home, ahead of schedule, I'd say. The answer has to be Sherlock Holmes." "How do you figure that?" Orlov's lips twitched, a sign of satisfaction rarely seen on his features. "Noticed your friend here react when Howard Andrade described his assistant?" My gaze shifted to Holmes, whose eyes were twinkling. "Dear me, I have become transparent. But Orlov is right. The description of the assistant Lewis bore a remarkable resemblance to Memory Max." My inquisitive stare was undiminished, for I did not share Holmes's encyclopedic knowledge of members of the criminal classes. In his early years Max did a turn in the music halls as a memory expert. Answered any question. Photographic memory, you see. However, he turned his not inconsiderable talents to less legitimate pursuits and became one of the leading forgers of our time. "How strange!" I exclaimed. "A man with a freak memory turning to forgery." "Not so, Watson. Those with an unusual mental aptitude frequently find great relaxation in working with their hands. Max's dexterity with tools and dice proved most embarrassing to the government." "Well, I thought you rather disproved that, old fellow." But then my mind rejected this thought. Holmes did, in moments of relaxation, derive great solace from his violin. Orlov was sipping his liquor thoughtfully. Max specialized in guineas and sovereigns. "I know of him." "But I know him," said Holmes, and there was an instant gleam in Orlov's eyes. "I was instrumental in laying Max by the heels, back in '81, as I recall. An early case. He has been safely in Dartmoor for years, but obviously is out now." "Wait!" I blurted. "You mean that Memory Max was a plant next to Howard and Ruddy?" I was pleased at coming up with a suitable colloquialism. "Of course." Holmes's tone, not by intent, indicated that a 5-year-old child would be au courant with this. "But the mysterious they were after Andrade himself. They got into his bedroom, you know." "I allowed your recreation to stand, Watson, since it served as an alarm to Howard and Ruddy. However, you had it all wrong. Bedsheets torn and knotted together to form a rope to allow one to descend from the first-story room to the canal level are not a means of entry, but of exit. What happened is clear enough. Memory Max was used as a means of getting close to Andrade, to memorize his files and learn the secret of his decoding of the secret writings. At an appropriate time, the arrival of Chu Sanfu's yacht, I presume, he was to be spirited away to join the master criminal. Destination: Egypt. But an unforeseen element was introduced when we arrived in Venice. Were I to come face to face with Memory Max, I would recognize him. So, the "they" you refer to had to prevent our meeting. They signaled Max to get out, setting a time for a gondola to be under the window of the master bedroom. Using the plea of exhaustion, the forger arranged to be in the bedroom, and fashioned the rope of bedsheets to facilitate his escape. Your spotting it almost upset their plans." I leaned back in my chair, more than a little pleased with the last statement. Holmes's eyes adopted that opaque look that I know so well. Silence fell on the table, and I exchanged a look with Orlov that drew a shrug as a reply. Finally, the security agent said softly, "What now?" "There is," responded Holmes in an almost dreamy manner, "a bit more surmise than I approve of. Chu San-fu has the secret sword and is headed for Alexandria. The Chinaman's yacht is en route here. Beyond these facts, we are guessing. My thought is that Chu Sanfu will pick up Memory Max here, in Venice, and then continue to Egypt. But what of the Mannheim tablets? I have a feeling those writings in gold are a part of the puzzle. I recall they were stolen from the Mannheim collection and believe that the thief was captured. Without my files and commonplace books, details elude me. Can you prompt me on this matter, Orloff? In part, one Heinrich Hublein was convicted of the theft and is in prison now. The tablets were never found, but the why of that I do not know. Wolfgang von Schalloway might, said Holmes. I will cable the esteemed chief of the Berlin police tonight, and if his answer proves interesting, we shall resume our travels tomorrow, Watson, in an attempt to add more pieces to this international jigsaw.